I have a question for you. What makes a herbalist, both in quality and title? In today's video, I would like to focus on the title part of that question. What does it mean to be a herbalist as a practice, as a profession here in the UK? There's a fraction in some parts of the herbalist community over a very contentious issue, and that issue is of licensing and standardisation of herbalists in the UK. Some claim that you cannot call yourself a herbalist unless you've joined a herbal body, got certain forms of training, and there are others that believe if you've practiced herbalism, you're a herbalist. In this video, we are going to dive in to some burning questions, certainly questions that I have, about what it is to exist as a herbalist within the UK and to practice it as a profession. Discussions like this and forming our own opinions around where we sit within the UK's legal system will inform how we are as herbalists and how we see our place in the world. This video is going to take more of a podcast kind of format, so go fold some washing, do some laundry, cook in your kitchen, or sit back, relax and get yourself a cozy drink. I've got a coffee, gonna need it for this one. And let's talk about what it means to be a herbalist. I've got my laptop around for this one because I have a lot of notes, I have a lot of quotes, and I'm gonna need to work through it. We've got this, we're gonna be fine. This is not a new debate. It's been happening to varying degrees throughout history. As long as there have been law, this debate has been happening between herbalists and standardisation. I mean, there's legislation going back to the 1500s from Henry VIII, so it goes back quite far, and this debate is ongoing. So to make sure that we're all on the same page for beginning this discussion, I would like to go over some definitions so we all know what we're coming from. The definitions of certain words are incredibly important, especially in a legal context, but they also give us the social and linguistic context for the arguments that are being put forth. The first thing to note is that the first use of the term herbalist to denote a profession is unconfirmed. If you start looking into this and you start looking up the first use of the word herbalist, most search engines will direct you to an English dramatist playwright called Robert Greene, who in the late 1500s, I think it was in the 1590s, wrote about herbalism in some of his plays. But he didn't write about herbalism really discussing it in terms of a profession. He used herbalism to make some very long metaphors in his plays about ointments and healing and so on and so forth. And he talks a little bit about it in some of his notes, but that is about it. It's not really herbalism as a profession that we know today. Herbalists have historically had many names, and they vary across the regions of the UK, and they have varied dramatically throughout time. This matters because if we were to decide to protect a title as a profession for herbalism, you need to be on the same page of what word it is that you are going to protect. And with herbalism, there are hundreds of different names for the profession. So you need to be able to pick one. My personal favourite one is an Old English one. An Old English profession for a herbalist called a simples, that comes from the herbal preparation of a simple, using one herb or one herbal preparation to make a herbal medicine. Simpler, that was the word, it was called a simpler. I loved that. I think we should bring that back. There have been so many names. Herbwife has been one. Different variations of the spelling of herbalist as well. It really does go on. But for the sake of this argument, we're going to look at the word herbalist to be protected. The word herbalist itself contains two parts. Herbal, which means of herbs. You would have seen it written down as herbal. It's a Latin word from Liber Herbalis, which is book of herbs. And then the suffix ist, which means to be concerned with. Botanist, concerned with botany. Artist, concerned with art. Herbalist, concerned with herbs. So, herbalist is someone concerned with herbs by the direct definition of the word. Today, the modern connotation of the word herbalist is someone who practices herbalism or is a practitioner of herbal medicine. So the next thing we need to look at is what is a protected title. In the UK, we use the term protected title when we mean regulated profession. In the UK law, a regulated profession is outlined in the Professional Qualifications Act 2022 as professions, occupations or trades regulated by law, and you need to have a certain level of qualifications or experience to undertake activities using said title. The regulators or regulatory bodies are the ones that oversee this. There are a number of regulatory bodies that oversee every profession within the UK. Sometimes there can be multiple regulatory bodies for the same profession, and sometimes there can be very distinct regulatory bodies. So they exist for aviation, food, health, everything. But different areas of healthcare have lots of different regulatory bodies because health is such a wide scope, and there are so many different types of profession with very different day-to-day responsibilities and practices. An easy example of this is dentistry and midwifery. The everyday, day-to-day runnings of a dentist are very different to the everyday, day-to-day runnings of a midwife. So they have two very distinct, very separate regulatory bodies. Their professions require very distinct skills and knowledge from each other. A good example to see where herbalist kind of fits into this is looking at nutritionists. Nutritionist is not a protected title, it's not a regulated profession in the UK, but dietitian is. Dietitians, so to be able to use dietitian as the name of your profession, is a regulated profession overseen by the Health and Care Professions Council, and the distinction is seen as nutritionists teach and inform and dietitians diagnose and treat, and that is the distinct line as to why nutritionists and dietitians are two very different professions and also policed differently under the law because of that. There's a very common misconception in the herbal sphere that clinical herbalist or medical herbalist is a protected title. It is not. There is no protected title for herbalism under the law in the UK. You can call yourself a clinical herbalist, a medical herbalist, an energetic herbalist, any kind of herbalist, or just herbalist as a business name or a profession within the confines of the law. It means that they can be used as professional titles and business names with impunity. It's fine. An interesting thing I found when doing this research that I had no idea about before was that apothecary is still a regulated term. I had no idea. It's protected by the Medical Act of 1983, and you need to register with the GMC, the General Medical Council, before being able to name your business as an apothecary. This is because apothecary is basically the old term for a pharmacist, and especially during 1600s, they were the dispensaries of medicines and prescriptions provided by doctors. So that's why apothecary is still regulated, but I don't know how strongly this is enforced, if I'm honest, because I've seen restaurants in London that have the term apothecary in their name, and I've seen like Bath and Body kind of shops that have apothecary in the name, and candle shops that have apothecary in the name, and I don't think they're registered with the GMC. So I don't know how strongly that one is policed, because there's an interesting one. So let's give a quick summary before moving on. A herbalist is someone who practices herbal medicine. This is not a regulated profession and does not have a regulatory body under the law. This does not mean that herbalists and herbal practices are completely lawless and that they can do exactly what they want. There are a lot of directives, rules and regulations under the law that do police the certain forms of medication, certain herbs that can and can't be used, Schedule 20 herbs for example, the way that you sell preparations, traditional herbal registrations. There is a lot already in place. I'll be doing a deep dive on where herbalism sits within the law in another video, but for this one we are just focusing on the one question of, should herbalism be standardised within the UK and therefore become a protected title? Now, when I'm doing research for this, the arguments were very varied and very nuanced. I've split them into three main headings from the bulk of arguments that I've seen. The first one being the issue of safety and accountability, the second one being the issue of centralised control, and the last one, the issue of creating a regulatory body. Safety and accountability are one of the main reasons people call for a regulatory body. People in the healing space want individuals to receive the best possible care that they can and that they are safe in doing so. That's something that everyone on every side of the argument can agree on. They just agree on different ways to get there. Some believe that standardization is the only way to get there. The idea of standardization from a safety and accountability point of view is to stop what we're going to call bad actors. Bad actors are people who are claiming to be herbalists, normally to sell a product or to promote a very dangerous or unhealthy idea. This has become a lot more of an issue with AI invading the herbal space. There have been full AI generated herbalism books, luckily, that get taken down fairly regularly. For a while, one was making the rounds that misidentified yarrow and poison hemlock, which is a big no-no, and it was being sold on Amazon to anyone. There's a load of dangerous things like this when you don't have people checking it. There were some books that were making or recommending herbal preparations without mentioning like contraindications, like don't use this for pregnancy, don't use this on kids. AI in the herbalism space is a worrying prospect. There are also people on TikTok, Instagram, the like, especially that seem to be part of MLMs, multi-level marketing companies, who use herbal claims or call themselves herbalists to promote a dangerous product or promote engaging in some dangerous practices. I've definitely seen this over my feed a lot. It became worse during lockdown, particularly with people promoting essential oils and using essential oils in very dangerous ways that could cause burns, for example. It is a harmful thing for them to be doing, and they're doing it while calling themselves a herbalist. These people do exist. Luckily, they are few and far between. Another issue is people, as in patients, not understanding where to go to receive treatment with the valid fears of bad actors. Some people may come to herbalists or be seeking herbal treatment for the first time, have trust issues, have medical trauma, for example, and could feel like they don't know where to go to, who's qualified. It could seem like a bit of a minefield for a new person trying to seek herbal treatment. And for them, having a herbal regulatory body does ensure a certain level of expertise or understanding before they're using the title of herbalist. In 2015, the Walker Report was published. This was a big report by Professor David Walker, where he was commissioned into examining options for standardization of herbal practitioners and herbal preparations after a directive was implemented in the EU. It came into force in the EU, affecting herbalists and the sale and distribution of medicines, but the UK opted not to implement it, and this inquiry was set up as a result. The UK, while not implementing the EU directive, did have some safety concerns about herbal medicines. David Walker set up the Herbal Medicine Practitioners Group, where herbal practitioners from different walks of life within the UK were part of a big discussion group about standardization, how it would work, if it would work, and they were consulted on this paper. This is a very important paper for this argument, and it's important that we know a little bit about it. In outlining the safety concerns for herbal medicines, the report says, the anecdotal evidence of risk to patients from herbal products in the safety review highlighted the prominence of manufactured herbal medicines in the high-profile serious incidents which have been reported in recent years. Many of these reports relate to harm thought to be caused industrially, manufactured herbal products which contained either dangerous herbs, the wrong constituents, toxic contaminants, or adulterants. The report also goes on to mention the yellow card system. This is the system used by many a doctor to report side effects or safety concerns with other drugs. There is also a yellow card system within herbalists. So there are many herbalists that use this system and report drug interactions, drug-herb interactions, safety concerns with a herb, manufacturing concerns, so on and so forth. And the report notes that overall, the safety concerns reported from this yellow card system are incredibly low, but he doesn't know if that's because of underreporting, so people not using the yellow card system, or because the herbal medicines are overall safe. So when considering statutory regulation for herbalists, with these things in mind, he looked into three main questions. Question 1 is, how effective is herbal medicine? He determined that a full review of this was outside the scope of this review in particular. But he does mention looking at a sizable number of herbal medicine papers, and because of what was deemed as poor quality or inconsistent research, he concluded it is difficult to differentiate good practice from poor practice on the basis of this evidence in a way that could establish standards for statutory regulation. There's not enough information from research papers about the safety and efficacy of herbal medicine, and there's not enough reporting of side effects on the yellow card system for it to be deemed a concern. So that's point 1. The second question he asks is, what evidence underpins an evaluation of the case for statutory regulation of herbal practitioners, i.e. what are the risks to patient safety? To this, he says, most herbal medicine products have not been through the rigorous licensing process that is required of conventional pharmaceutical products to establish their safety and efficacy. He then reiterated the yellow card system again, and the previous points on anecdotal evidence for safety concerns being mostly on industrially manufactured herbal products, the low reporting of side effects. The third question he asked are herbal practitioners and the infrastructure that support them sufficiently prepared for statutory regulation? This is a big one. Like, can the herbalists themselves, is there enough in place for herbalists themselves to be able to do this? To this he says, the third issue is the need to be able to identify common and consistent educational standards for training practitioners and the benchmarking of standards for accrediting practitioners. Without these underpinning standards, statutory regulation will not work, as there is no basis for evidence-based decisions relevant to admission onto and removal from a statutory register. Therefore, the statutory register will fail in its primary aim of protecting the public. Basically, there are so many different herbal schools, herbal institutions, herbal traditions within the UK, that there's not one consistent educational standard. All of the schools are, and if you do go to one of the herbal schools, you know that they're all very, very different in the way that they create herbalists. Because of this, also the tests are incredibly different. Some have standardized testing, some have coursework, some have a mix, some have no testing at all. Some have it through presenting a body of work. There isn't uniformity within herbal education. And what would a regulatory body do? The point of a regulatory body is they can give you accreditation, but they can also take it away. This is the accountability bit we're talking about. So someone could do the education, become part of the board, get part of this regulatory body, and they can use the term herbalist, but through malpractice or through safety concerns, they can have that title revoked. That is the point of a regulatory body, to be able to protect the public through giving and removing of licenses. He concludes the paper with several recommendations for the herbal sector, but the section on practitioners goes as follows. Having taken into account the evidence available and the views of representatives of the sector, I consider that, despite strong calls by many for statutory regulation, there is not yet credible scientific evidence based to demonstrate risk from both products and practitioners, which would support the step. There's also very limited evidence of effectiveness in herbal medicines in improving health outcomes. This also makes it difficult to establish the boundaries of good practice, which would be required for both educational qualification and the implementation of statutory regulation. Basically, he ends this paper by saying, "Hi everyone, editing Shannon popping on here because I realised I didn't actually explain this point all that well. The Walker report concludes by making 3 points. Firstly, that there's not enough evidence that there is a danger to public safety from practitioners or their products. Secondly, that there's not enough evidence that herbal medicine actually works. And thirdly, because of these first 2 points, it'd be incredibly difficult to outline what he calls the boundaries of good practice, which is the standards that someone would have to meet to be able to join the regulatory body and be kicked off it. So educational standards, standards of training, and things like that." If you are a herbalist in the UK, a herbalism student, and you haven't already, I do recommend reading the Walker report. It's a bit long, but it is easy to read. They've made it very accessible. They've used very plain language. It's got a lot of very valid and interesting points about the state of herbalism in the UK and what it means for practitioners. I think it's a very good thing to read. So the paper mentions that there are varying people calling for standardisation. So let's have a bit of a look at who those people are. So NIM is the first people we're going to look at. NIM is the National Institute for Medicinal Herbalists. They welcome standardisation. They have consulted on many discussions on the regulation of herbalists. They're quite openly pro-herbalist regulation, which makes sense because they are a voluntary register for herbalists. There are a number of voluntary registers for herbalists throughout the UK. There are many that overlook different traditions of herbalism. TCM, Traditional Chinese Medicine, has, I think, 2 or 3 bodies. Tibetan Medicine, Ayurveda, and Western Herbalism. There are a number of voluntary regulatory authorities that you can join that do confer the same kind of benefits, but is not protected by law. These regular bodies can confer and revoke membership based on different standards, which is the form of internal accountability. There are also places where herbalists can report things like the yellow card system and keep up to date with general goings on in the herbal sector. There are certain schools as well, certain herbal schools that are very vocal about being pro-statutory regulation. The College of Phytotherapy, for example, have had a number of high-profile members or directors or just college associates speak or write about pro-regulation. Other schools keep their ideas really, really close to their chest and keep that discussion internally, don't tend to consult on papers, so it's harder to find things that they've openly said and quote them. But I am of the view that you can learn a lot about a school by their view on statutory regulation, about what is a herbalist, who can call themselves a herbalist. If certain schools are telling you you cannot call yourself a herbalist until you've completed X, Y, and Z, it tells you a lot about their values and where they stand on statutory regulation. A number of doctors, of the general medical doctors, GPs, and various professionals in the medical world have been extremely vocal in journals, especially, about their opinions on herbal medicine, its efficacy, its standardisation. Largely negative opinions across the board, if I'm honest. But even within the community of doctors, there does seem to be a split on the idea of regulation for very different reasons, which surprised me. The Lancet is a peer-reviewed general medical journal here in the UK. It's a very revered, very respected medical journal. And back in 2011, in response to an EU directive, which is the one that the Walker report was based on, an EU directive made it illegal for practitioners of herbal medicine throughout the EU to supply patients with unlicensed manufactured herbal remedies. And at this point of this article coming out and this directive coming out, the UK was still an EU member state. And in the UK, as we know, that directive was sidestepped. So came into play in many EU member states, not in the UK. And it quotes from a survey from a Department of Health consultation paper in which 85% of respondents from the survey were in favour of regulation and 15% were not. The Lancet does make some very valid criticisms of this survey though. People responded that the survey was really difficult to understand, and one of the criticisms of the survey was that the opinions of people on the people in the Royal College of Physicians, their opinion was seen as equal from people who own, I think they said something like acupuncturist shops. I think they used the phrase something like acupuncturist shops down the street. So they didn't like that their opinions were being held in high regard as kind of more holistic professions' opinions. In the article, the Lancet wrote, they quoted the Royal College of Physicians, who said they were disappointed to hear of government plans to bring in statutory regulation for herbal practitioners in the UK. The proposed register will imply herbal therapies have the same legitimacy as medicine, nursing and dentistry, despite offering patients no proven benefit. So basically, the ones that were against regulation were because they were like, why would you want to make herbalism regulated? It's like, it just made me laugh. That one made me laugh. There are a lot more arguments than this when we're looking at safety and accountability for practitioners and the issues of standardization. The more I dug, the more back and forth there seems to be. There are splits and divisions within every sector that comment on it. The divide is huge, and most of the criticisms are valid and the fears are valid, and everyone's just trying to get around this in a way that they believe is best for the patients or for individuals seeking treatment. The issues of patient safety are valid, but I think we can agree that's something that everyone does care about. We need to move on to the next point or we're going to be here all day. Many of the arguments against standardization stem from the issue of centralised control. The first idea I'd like to introduce you to here is the idea of radical herbalists. These are a big pool of people with very varying range of viewpoints, of ideas, of thoughts and ethics, but radical herbalism tends to contain socialists, liberals, anarchists. They often practice social justice and engage in activism as part of their herbalism practice. And there's a very strong community presence and engagement within the community within radical herbalism circles. When we say radical herbalism, radical coming from the root word in Latin radix, which means the root. And the idea is getting to the root cause of ill health. And that's not just a physical thing. It's also a mental thing, a spiritual thing, an emotional thing, and part of your place in the wider world. They also look to support current healthcare systems so that individuals can have freedom of choice. We say radical herbalism, but it's not an us v them kind of radical herbalism. It's a we're in this together kind of radical herbalism. In this, the first group I would like to introduce you to is the Herbarium. They don't call themselves radical herbalists, but their views do seem to align. The Herbarium is a collective of independent herbalists who come together to share knowledge. They've created a complete open resource for anyone looking to learn about herbalism, herbal medicine. They have a fantastic blog that's linked below. And on the homepage for the Herbarium, where they discuss a little bit about themselves, they say, "We do not consent to the erosion by regulation of our common law freedoms and rights. We therefore oppose the current attempts to turn traditional Western herbalists into the poor cousins of doctors, using herbal products as they were the poor cousins of drugs." I loved that quote. That made me happy. I just really liked it. I was like, yeah, this is great. If you haven't seen this blog, it is a wonderful resource. I recommend that you check it out. The website's in the description of this video. It's got not just essays and opinions on it, but it's got medicine making, it's got tips and advice. Really, really great articles on there that I highly recommend taking a deep dive into. On the Herbarium blog, there is a wonderfully impassioned argument by New York-based herbalist Susan Weed titled "No Licensing of Herbalists," which really does echo this kind of radical herbalism idea. She says, "Licenses don't protect people. They protect and create institutions. Herbalism is change, individuality, and uniqueness. Institutions don't change. Licensing herbalists kills herbal medicine. Licenses and their companion, liability insurance, set up protocols. The art of herbalism is replaced with evidence-based science designed to protect healers, not heal patients. No license for herbalists." She continues later in the article, "Licenses do not confer credit, merit, or worth. They replace these things. We have an excellent system already in place for certifying herbalists, the apprentice system. We know each other, our strengths and our foibles. We know who we have trained, and we talk more openly. Licenses make people less secure, less likely to trust each other, less open and more protective." When I was making this video, I reached out to a network of mine, professionally trained herbalists that have been doing this for years. They're incredibly insightful and very varied and nuanced opinions. They gave me some wonderful points for this video that I really want to share. One of the herbalists I spoke to said that starting with no formal training but a great deal of experience is more of a thing of the past. This slightly deviates from the idea of that Susan Weed was putting forward. The general trend seems to be that people might be interested in herbalism, so they read a couple papers online, they follow some creators, they maybe get some books from the library, start practicing and making a few things before searching for and undertaking a herbal course, which is a formal form of education. The days of finding a local herbalist and working solely with them and apprenticing with them and learning their way is more a thing of the past. Most people go for a form of formal education now. But within those new formal education kind of arenas, the schools that you might go to, with most of them you do clinic hours to pass. So that kind of keeps the apprenticeship element in it. So people aren't leaving on a solely theoretical basis and going out into the world like, in theory, I can do this. They have the practical skills behind them. And the modern schools are doing really well at keeping this balance of professionalism, practicality, and having the hands-on work with the very nuanced and oftentimes complex level of theory that's involved in herbalism. Being a regulated profession, opting for standardization, would be one of the first steps really to having herbalism widely available on things like the NHS. But a lot of herbalists have argued back that most of them already run sliding scale or free healthcare options, and because they're not on the NHS and are forced to have the long wait times, they can give herbal treatment a lot quicker to a lot more people. A lot of herbalists run discounted treatments or free treatments. They treat people in a main clinic, or they do education and use fees and profit from that to be able to supplement giving away free herbal medicine. There are free herbal clinics in every major city in the UK. There are mobile herbal clinics as well, go out to cities, and there's a lot of support for individuals that might want to set up a mobile herbal clinic in their own town. There are walk-ins, there are Herbalists Without Borders who go to refugee camps in Calais, who go to places all over the world with herbal medicines and can implement herbal medicine very quickly. There's the Solidarity Apothecary, there's a lot of free treatment out there, and there's a lot of free herbal care for those in need, and most herbalists are really good at balancing this with their other professional endeavours already. One of the herbalists I spoke to made the suggestion that it's a small group of mostly men that practice within a very medicalised model, have agitated regulation within the UK to the extent of telling the HRA that herbalists are dangerous, to force the issue of standardisation. This is a big fish in a small pond effect, and there are people like this. There are. I've seen them. The following statistic is purely anecdotal, but a good 99% of the herbalists I've met are wonderful stand-up people that just want the best for individuals. But then you do get a few, and it is through practicing, it seems, a more medicalized model of herbalism and taking out the spiritual aspect, which is part of herbalism and part of herbalism's draw for individuals who are wanting to put themselves as an authority within herbalism and try to position themselves that way while calling for standardization of. I also had some wonderful international herbalists, which kind of gave me a overview of what's happening in other countries. A lovely Canadian herbalist said that the conventional medical system out there does not want a partnership with herbalists. It seems like the system there wants to be kept very much separate. Herbalists mostly are very happy to cooperate. Medical system is like, no. But she also mentioned that she loves the empowerment that herbalism gives people navigating their own path. And I think that's a really wonderful thing about herbalism, especially when you start treating yourself and your family. You realise how much you can do for yourself. And there is a lot of empowerment in that. There were fears over a more or less anonymous registration body, which is a valid point. When herbalism is tied up in bureaucracy, it stops us from acting. Who are our representatives? Who are our contacts? Did we vote them in? Did they get placed there? The non-regulation at the moment lets things get implemented and change happen, and the sharing of medicines is a wonderful thing I've seen that can just happen very freely. There was a free clinic that ran out of elderflower, and they were calling online for people like, can you send us extra elderflower tinctures, any berries that you've got, so that we can make immune tonics for the winter. And so many people just sent in without thinking about it, like, here's all the extra things. It didn't need to be mobilized through a regulatory body. It could have just acted, and they did, and it got done, and it was great. Herbalism has always been made and distributed locally. Made from home, distributed into the local community. You can't stop people growing their own food and sharing it, and you can't stop people making herbal medicine and sharing it. You can try and police that act, which is what standardization would try to do, but you can't police the intention. And I think this issue of centralized control really sits in that little venue of intention. The third issue to look at when we come to standardization of herbal medicines in the UK is the issue of creating a regulatory body itself. This does underpin a lot of the issues raised by herbalists. As we mentioned at the beginning, all regulated professions are overseen by a regulatory body. Establishing this has its issues. Establishing the regulatory body means that their responsibilities would be to confer or revoke membership, set the educational standards of doing so, liaise with government and government action, organise the herbalists themselves, report safety concerns. And as we've mentioned already, herbalism has a lot of regulations around its practices already and has voluntary organisations like NIM. These are two things to remember. There are a lot of schools of thought and belief systems within herbal medicine. We've mentioned that there are already voluntary regulatory bodies for many different traditions, so Western herbalism, places like NIM, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, so on and so forth. The first thing that would have to be established is, would there be one singular regulatory body to oversee all of these traditions, or would it be many different individual bodies? All of these practices have incredibly different modes of education. They've got incredibly different practices and day-to-day practices themselves. Their business models are incredibly different. The way that you join different institutions is really different. The system of self-regulation that we have now essentially does that because of the individual bodies. The plus side of having multiple regulatory bodies means that there's less red tape and less long lines for them to get help. So a TCM practitioner can go to the TCM body to try and get help quicker than if there were multiple bodies trying to get through to one central multiple different schools trying to get through to one central regulatory body. Downside of this is it's harder to then blur the lines of practice. If there is an individual who, say they mainly practice Western herbal medicine, but they take another course and spend some time learning Tibetan herbal medicine, but they're also a qualified acupuncturist. Do they get regulated by one herbal body or three? Whatever herbal body or herbal bodies that you put in place, they need to be a clear representation of the people they are supporting. There are a lot of issues, especially within the UK, of when you get to regulatory bodies or you get to certain governmental organisations, that one particular identity group, we're going to call it, tends to take over and dominate a space. There are a lot of groups where there is just one particular type of person in charge. If you also start crossing over all the different systems and saying that herbalist as well, this is the issue, the term herbalism can only be used by one type of herbalist, one type of tradition, what does that make all the other traditions? This is the really worrying point where I can see us beginning to lose indigenous knowledge, minority knowledge, local custom. All of these really wonderful, diverse things about herbalism could become under threat. Then the regulator or regulators would need to decide on the scope of education in order to confer membership to said regulatory body, or to be able to say you are a herbalist. This brings in a lot more issues. Do you do standardized testing? There are many issues to standardized testing, especially within the herbal space. The issue is also that standardized testing, especially in the herbal sphere, doesn't show if you can carry out a consultation. And it doesn't show if you can make the medicines in either practice or theory, really. Ideally, there'd be some way where an individual could submit a body of work and be assessed that way before joining. All of the herbal schools that exist already are so vastly different and have incredibly different views on how the world works. I can't see any way that you could make one system of entering a regulatory body. I don't. But that's for people that are far smarter than me. The regulatory body would also need to be rolled out in such a way that it doesn't overnight impact currently practicing herbalists. When I reached out to my groups, many of the herbalists I spoke to made the point that if statutory regulation came out tomorrow and it looked like other regulatory bodies that are already in existence, many of them would lose their livelihoods overnight. They'd lose their businesses. They'd lose their ability to practice, to promote themselves, to market themselves. To make something so sudden that we lose a bunch of incredibly talented herbalists would not only be a tragedy, but this would have a deep and very lasting impact in the herbal sphere in general, because you're going to lose a lot of very well-known and practiced viewpoints in herbalism. There are a lot of amazing herbalists doing really amazing work, and I genuinely hope that they can continue to do so. Many are afraid of standardization and losing their freedoms from it. So, what's the answer? Simply put, I don't know. I don't know. There are a lot of valid criticisms for the implementation of standardization. There are. I'm not going to pretend they're not. But I know how I feel, and I align a lot more closely with the radical herbalists. I don't think herbalists benefit from herbal regulation, nor do I think the patients would overall. And I don't think herbalism as a way of life, an industry, whatever you'd like to call it, will benefit from standardization as a whole. I think it would damage it. I understand the need for clarity. I understand the desire, the fundamental desire and need for safety and accountability. And putting your trust in someone with something as sensitive as your health. Majority of herbalists have put things in place to deal with that already. I really hope herbalism doesn't go the way of standardization. I hope it stays a practice of the people for the people the way it always has been. I hope that it stays free from government influence. But I do hope, if standardization has to happen one day, if after all of the protests of herbalists fall on deaf ears and standardization is implemented, I hope that it is done in such a way that it can be kept as incredibly diverse as it is, as beautifully inclusive as it is, and as wonderfully wholesome as it is. I've already mentioned the Herbalist network I reached out to for this video, but I got one response in particular that really sums up my feelings on this topic as a whole. It was beautifully written, and I'm going to read it for you now. Written by the wonderful herbalist Jim Macdonald, a Michigan-based herbalist and the owner of Herbcraft. He's been featured in many wonderful YouTube videos. I'm going to leave his details in the description of this video. But he said, if someone collects plants or uses collected plants to help themselves or others, they are a herbalist. What else would they be? Depending on the way or degree to which they do that, they may be a family herbalist or a clinical herbalist or a folk herbalist or a community herbalist or a Chinese or energetic or indigenous or Ayurvedic herbalist. Some people, while still being herbalists, might be remarkably bad herbalists. That is possible. Outside of remarkably bad herbalists, none of these other distinctions are better than another. Chinese herbalists are not better than Western herbalists. Energetic herbalists are not better than folk herbalists. Clinical herbalists are not better than family herbalists. I know amazing clinical herbalists who specialise in complex endocrine imbalances who would refer out a fussy teething baby. The way to be a great herbalist, in whatever way you are a herbalist, is to understand the scope of your skill and experience and help people from there. If something is outside that, you just say, that's really outside the scope of my practice of herbalism, and refer them to someone else. Of course, we are all stretching our edges all the time to grow the scope of our experience, but we should do this keeping one foot firmly grounded in what we know and feel confident in. People who feel very confident in things they don't know might fall into the remarkably bad herbalist category. Not knowing all things is not a failure. It is not a shortcoming. Herbalism isn't a hierarchy or a competition where the person who knows the most is the best and wins. Different herbalists know different things, and different herbalists can be better fit for different people with different issues to address. For my part, I absolutely want more people to embrace and use the term herbalist. I know. Someone out there is thinking, but there are these people on Instagram or TikTok calling themselves herbalists and saying the wrong things. To that I respond, I was once also a herbalist on the internet saying the wrong things. People who knew more than me were nice to me, shared their thoughts and understandings, and I learned more and now know less wrong things. Wrong things are always going to be in the mix, but keep an eye out and be ready to let go or refine and not be defensive about. Those people could have just said I sucked and that I was an example of the dumbing down of herbalism, and yes, a few people did. But instead, most of the people I met were kind and encouraging. In what little ways we can, lifting up herbalists is always good for herbalism. So why did I make this video? I had a research bug that I needed to itch. And I also wanted to put the thousands of pounds I spent on a master's degree in law to subsequently drop out of to good use. Please subscribe. Herbalism is inherently political. I know a lot of us like to think it's not. Me too on some days. But herbalism is a radical act. It's an act of community. It's an act of compassion. It's an act of environmentalism. It's our connection to our history. It's our connection to the earth. Our practices now and topics like this help us understand where we sit within the systems in place and therefore how to work around them. Understanding where we sit in the law, understanding that there are people out there that don't want us practicing, and understanding that there are people out there that really do, is going to help inform us and make us better herbalists. So I hope that you took something from this video. I hope you carry around some of these concepts. Please keep the discussion going in the comments. I want to hear from you. I've also put a load of things that I read, some interesting links in the description of this video, so make sure to check it out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. Congratulations for making it through this video. You did so well. I'm so proud of you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys. I'm exhausted. I'm so tired. My script for this was 10 pages long. It took me 4 weeks to write this. I've been filming for nearly an hour and 20 minutes. I'm so tired. I need to go lie down. And have a tea. But it's done. It's done. We did it. Bum bum. We did it. I'm gonna have a nap now. A nap now. On search engine. Against standardization. Regulation of our common. I'm so tired.